Number asterisk, asterisk. The lantern keeper's promise, asterisk, 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 hook, 0015, asterisk, asterisk. They found his logbook open to the last page, November 18th, 1978, 11:52 p.m. 4 words written in shaking handwriting. I must keep burning. The lighthouse keeper vanished that night during the worst storm Maine had seen in decades. His body was never recovered. But here's what nobody can explain for the next 47 years. That lantern never went dark. Not once. Even when there was no fuel left. Even when the lighthouse was condemned and locked. The light kept burning. And if you ask the locals, they'll tell you the same thing. Voices barely above a whisper, he's still up there, keeping his promise to a woman who's been dead for 30 years. Asterisk, asterisk, promise and setup, 0:15 at 3:30. Asterisk, asterisk. This is the story of Samuel Reed, a man who loved so deeply that not even death could break his word. It's a story about obsession, guilt, and a promise that transcended the boundary between life and whatever comes after. What you're about to hear isn't folklore. It isn't legend. Every detail, every strange occurrence, every unexplained phenomenon, it's all documented. Police reports, Coast Guard logs, witness testimonies, and one letter that was found 15 years too late, written in ink that shouldn't have existed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The questions we need to answer are simple, but the answers will chill you to your core. Who was Samuel Reed? What promise did he make? And why, decades after his disappearance, do people still refuse to go near Halewood Point Lighthouse after dark? Let's start at the beginning. With a man who thought isolation would save his marriage, he was wrong. Asterisk, asterisk. Backstory and character setup, 3:30:12. Asterisk, asterisk. Samuel Reed wasn't born on the coast. He grew up inland, in a small town outside Portland, the son of a carpenter and a seamstress. Quiet kid, kept to himself. The kind of boy who'd spend hours staring at the horizon, like he was searching for something nobody else could see. He met Margaret Whitmore at a church social in 1955. She was 22, just finished teacher's college, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and a laugh that made everyone in the room turn and smile. Samuel was 24, awkward, barely able to string 2 sentences together around her. But Margaret saw something in him. Maybe it was his gentleness. Maybe it was the way he listened when she talked about wanting to live somewhere quiet, away from the noise and expectations of city life. They married 6 months later. For the first few years, they were happy. Samuel worked construction. Margaret taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They rented a small house with a garden where Margaret grew tomatoes and herbs. Neighbors would describe them as the kind of couple you'd see walking hand in hand on Sunday mornings, not saying much, just content to be together. But Samuel always felt restless. He'd stand at their bedroom window at night, staring out toward the ocean, even though you couldn't see it from their house. Margaret noticed. She'd ask him what he was thinking about, and he'd just shake his head and say, "Nothing, sweetheart, just tired." But it wasn't nothing. Something about the sea called to him. In 1961, when the position for lighthouse keeper at Halewood Point opened up, Samuel applied without telling Margaret. When he got the job, he came home with the letter in his hand, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Margaret's face fell. Halewood Point was 40 miles up the coast, isolated, cut off from town by rocky cliffs and rough water. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. No phone lines ran out there. No electricity, except what the lighthouse generator provided. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. But Samuel begged. He told her it would be good for them. Peaceful. A chance to start fresh, away from the pressures of ordinary life. Margaret loved him, so she agreed. They moved to Halewood Point in the spring of 1962. The lighthouse stood on a jagged outcrop of rock, battered by wind and waves, surrounded by nothing but gray water and gray sky. Their living quarters were attached to the tower, 3 small rooms with stone walls and tiny windows, cold even in summer. The wind never stopped. At first, Margaret tried to make it home. She hung curtains, planted flowers in pots that the salt air killed within weeks. She wrote letters to her sister, long letters about how quiet it was, how the sound of the ocean kept her awake at night, how sometimes she felt like the only person left in the world. Samuel thrived. He loved the rhythm of lighthouse life, the daily routines, cleaning the lens, checking the fuel, winding the clockwork mechanism that turned the light, recording weather observations in the logbook. At night, he'd climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room and stand there for hours, watching the beams sweep across the dark water. He felt like he was doing something important, keeping sailors safe, being the one steady point in an endless, chaotic sea. But Margaret was fading. She stopped writing letters, stopped planting flowers. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the gray waves, and Samuel would ask her what was wrong, and she'd say, "Nothing. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. In 1965, they had a son. They named him Thomas. For a while, things got better. Margaret had someone to care for, someone to talk to. She'd walk with Thomas along the rocky shore, collecting shells and telling him stories about the stars. Samuel would watch them from the lantern room, smiling, thinking he'd finally given her what she needed. But the isolation was relentless. Thomas got sick when he was 3, a fever that wouldn't break. Margaret wanted to take him to a doctor, but the weather was too rough to launch the boat. They had to wait 2 days for the storm to pass. By the time they got him to the mainland, the fever had turned to pneumonia. Thomas died in the hospital 3 days later. Samuel and Margaret buried him in the town cemetery. They didn't talk about it. Not really. They went back to the lighthouse and kept living. But something between them had broken. Margaret blamed Samuel. She never said it out loud, but he could see it in her eyes every time she looked at him. If they'd lived in town, Thomas would have survived. If Samuel hadn't dragged her out to this God-forsaken rock, their son would still be alive. Samuel buried himself in his work. He became obsessive about the light. If he missed a night, if the lantern went dark, someone could die. That's what he told himself. He couldn't save Thomas, but he could save someone else's child, someone else's husband, someone else's father. The light had to burn, no matter what. By 1978, Margaret was a ghost. She barely spoke, barely ate. She'd spend entire days sitting in their bedroom, staring at a photograph of Thomas, whispering things Samuel couldn't hear. He tried to reach her. He'd make her favorite meals. He'd sit with her and hold her hand. But she was somewhere he couldn't follow. And then, in early November, Margaret told him she was leaving. She'd made arrangements with her sister. She was going back to Portland. She couldn't stay at the lighthouse anymore. Samuel panicked. He begged her not to go. He promised he'd retire. They'd move back to town. They'd start over. But Margaret just shook her head. "It's too late, Samuel. I should have left years ago." She was supposed to take the supply boat on November 20th. But on November 18th, the worst storm in decades rolled in from the north. Asterisk, asterisk. The incident, 12/22. Asterisk, asterisk. The storm warnings started coming in over the radio around noon. Gale force winds. Waves up to 40 feet. All vessels advised to seek harbor. Samuel logged it in his book. The 18th of November, 1978. 12:15 p.m. Storm approaching from northwest. Barometer dropping fast. Margaret was packing. She'd brought down a single suitcase, moving through the rooms like she was erasing herself, taking only what mattered. A few photographs, some clothes. The silver locket Samuel had given her on their wedding day. He watched her from the doorway, hands in his pockets, not knowing what to say. "You don't have to do this," he finally said. His voice was quiet, almost pleading. "We can make this work." Margaret didn't look at him. "There's nothing left to make work, Samuel." She closed the suitcase. The wind outside was starting to howl. By evening, the storm was in full force. The lighthouse shook with every gust. Rain lashed the windows like gravel. The ocean was a churning black mass. waves smashing against the rocks and sending spray 50 feet into the air. Samuel climbed to the lantern room at sunset, just like he did every night. He lit the kerosene lamp, adjusted the lens, set the clockwork rotation. The beam cut through the storm, steady and bright, a single point of certainty in the chaos. When he came back down, Margaret was standing at the kitchen table, staring out the window. She looked small, fragile, like the wind might blow her away if she stepped outside. They didn't eat dinner. Samuel tried to start a conversation, but Margaret didn't respond. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching the storm. Around 10 o'clock, something changed. Margaret turned to him, and for the first time in months, she really looked at him. Her eyes were red, but there was something else there too, something urgent. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was shaking. "I should have told you a long time ago." Samuel's chest tightened. "What is it?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. Tears started running down her face. "I can't stay here, Samuel. I can't. Every day I wake up and I see him. I see Thomas, and I see you, and I can't breathe." Samuel moved toward her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said. "Please, just let me say this." She took a deep breath. "It's my fault," she whispered. "Thomas, it's my fault. I knew he was getting worse. I knew we needed to get him to a doctor, but I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go back to town because I thought if we left, you'd make us stay. And by the time I said something, it was too late." Samuel felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "That's not true," he said. "Maggie, that's not true. You wanted to take him. I was the one who said we had to wait for the weather." Margaret shook her head, crying harder. "You don't understand. I wanted him to get worse. Just a little. Just enough that you'd have to take me seriously. Just enough that you'd finally see how much I hated it here. And then he died." Samuel reached for her, but she pushed him away. "I killed him, Samuel. I killed our son because I was selfish and bitter, and I hated you for bringing me here, and I can't live with that anymore." The wind outside screamed. The whole lighthouse groaned. Samuel didn't know what to say. He stood there, staring at his wife, this woman he'd loved for 23 years, and he realized he didn't know her at all. Margaret turned toward the door. "I'm leaving," she said. "Tonight. I don't care about the storm. I'd rather drown than spend one more night in this place." Samuel grabbed her arm. "You can't. The boat won't make it. You'll die out there." "Then I'll die," Margaret said. She pulled free and walked toward the door. Samuel followed her, shouting over the wind. "Please, Maggie, please don't do this. Wait until morning. I'm begging you." Margaret stopped at the door. She turned back, and for just a moment, her face softened. "I'm sorry, Samuel, for all of it." Then she opened the door and stepped out into the storm. Samuel ran after her. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Rain blinded him. He could barely see Margaret ahead, stumbling down the rocky path toward the boat launch. He shouted her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. By the time he reached the water, Margaret was already trying to untie the boat. The waves were massive, crashing over the dock, soaking them both. Samuel grabbed her shoulders. "Don't do this!" She shoved him hard. "Let me go!" They struggled. The boat rocked violently, and then a wave, bigger than the rest, came crashing over them. Samuel felt the water pull him under. He clawed his way to the surface, gasping, choking on salt water. When he managed to get his bearings, Margaret was gone. He screamed her name, searched the water, dove under again and again until his lungs burned and his limbs went numb, but the ocean had taken her. Samuel dragged himself back to shore. He collapsed on the rocks, sobbing, retching up seawater, and then he looked up at the lighthouse. The light was still turning, steady, bright, unwavering. He pulled himself to his feet and climbed back up the path, back into the lighthouse, back up the spiral stairs. He stood in the lantern room, drenched and shaking, staring out at the black water, and he made a promise. "I'll keep the light burning, Maggie, every night, so you can find your way home." He wrote it in the logbook. The 18th of November, 1978, 11:52 p.m. "She's gone. I must keep burning." That was the last entry Samuel Reed ever made. When the storm cleared 2 days later, the supply boat came to check on him. The lighthouse was empty. The lantern was still lit. Samuel's boat was found half sunk a mile down the coast. There was no sign of Margaret, no sign of Samuel, just the light, burning steady, like nothing had happened at all. Asterisk. Asterisk. The aftermath. An investigation. 22:35 to 0. Asterisk. Asterisk. The Coast Guard launched a full search. They combed the coastline for 2 weeks, sent divers down to check the rocks, interviewed everyone who'd ever known Samuel Reed, but they found nothing. Margaret's body never washed ashore. Samuel's body was never recovered. The case was officially classified as a double drowning. Tragic accident. Husband and wife lost in a storm. The lighthouse was temporarily staffed by a rotating crew of keepers while the authorities decided what to do with it. And that's when the strange reports started. The first keeper, a man named Robert Shaw, lasted 3 nights. He told investigators he kept hearing footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate footsteps. But every time he looked, there was nobody there. On the 3rd night, he woke up at 11:52 p.m. to find the lantern room door open. He knew he'd locked it. When he went up to check, the logbook was open to Samuel's last entry. The ink looked fresh. Shaw requested an immediate transfer. The next keeper, a younger man named David Cross, didn't believe in ghosts. He thought Shaw was just spooked by the isolation. But on his 2nd week, he experienced something that made him quit, on the spot. He was down in the kitchen, making coffee, when he heard a woman's voice, faint, coming from somewhere above. He climbed the stairs, following the sound, until he reached the lantern room. The voice stopped, but written in the condensation on the inside of the glass, in neat, flowing script, were 4 words: "I'm sorry, Samuel. Wait." Cross left that same night. Over the next 5 years, Halewood Point went through 11 different keepers. None of them stayed longer than a month. They all reported the same things: footsteps, voices, the logbook opening on its own, the lantern burning even when the fuel ran out. In 1983, the Coast Guard decided to automate the lighthouse. They installed an electric light system, sealed off the living quarters, and locked the whole place down. The official line was that it was more cost-effective. But the real reason, according to internal memos that surfaced years later, was that they couldn't keep staff there. Too many unexplained incidents. Too many men requesting transfers or quitting outright. One memo, dated March 1983, stated, "Halewood Point Lighthouse has become operationally untenable due to persistent reports of psychological distress among assigned personnel. Automation is the only viable solution." They turned on the automated light, locked the doors, and left. But here's the thing. The automated system had a backup generator and a solar panel array. It was designed to run for months without maintenance. And it did, for exactly 7 months. Then, in October 1983, the power failed. The automated light went dark. Maintenance crews were dispatched to fix it. When they arrived and unlocked the lighthouse, they found something that made no sense. The automated light had been manually turned off. Someone had climbed up to the lantern room, accessed the control panel, and shut it down. But the kerosene lamp, the old lamp that Samuel had used, was burning, bright and steady, full of fuel. The crew checked the records. Nobody had been inside the lighthouse since it was sealed. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors and windows were still locked from the outside. And yet, someone had lit that lamp. The crew reactivated the automated system and left. But 3 weeks later, it happened again. Automated light off. Kerosene lamp burning. This time, they found something else. The logbook, which had been locked in a storage cabinet, was sitting open on the desk in the lantern room. A new entry had been added. Promise kept. The handwriting matched Samuel Reed's. A handwriting analyst confirmed it. But Samuel Reed had been dead for 5 years. The Coast Guard sealed the lighthouse permanently after that, boarded up the windows, welded the doors shut, posted warning signs. Halewood Point was officially closed. And yet, on November 18th every year, at exactly 11:52 p.m., people in the nearby town of Crestwood report seeing a light in the old lighthouse. Not the automated light. The old kerosene lantern. Flickering. Steady. Burning through the night. Asterisk, asterisk, the twist and revelation, 35-0, 47-0, asterisk, asterisk. For 10 years, Halewood Point Lighthouse sat abandoned. It became a local legend. Kids would dare each other to hike out to the point and touch the door. Fishermen avoided the area, claiming their instruments went haywire when they got too close. And every year, on the anniversary of the storm, someone would call the police to report a light burning in the tower. In 1993, the state decided to restore the lighthouse as a historical site. They hired a construction crew to assess the structure and begin repairs. The crew chief, a man named Michael Torres, had worked on dozens of old buildings. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in curses. He believed in load-bearing walls and foundation integrity and getting the job done. His crew spent the first week clearing debris and removing the boards from the windows. On the 8th day, they started working inside the tower. That's when they found the envelope. It was sealed inside a metal box, hidden in a cavity behind one of the stones in the lantern room wall. The box was old, rusted, but intact. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in careful handwriting, to Margaret Reed, if she ever comes home. Torres opened it. Inside was a letter, written on lighthouse stationery, dated November 20th, 1978, 2 days after Samuel disappeared. The letter read, "My dearest Margaret, if you ever find this, I want you to know that I kept my promise. I lit the lantern every night so you could find your way home. I know you're gone. I know you're not coming back. But I can't stop. I won't stop. As long as the light burns, you're still with me. I see you in the beam. I hear you in the wind. And I'm not afraid anymore. I don't know how much longer I can stay. The cold is getting worse. I can't feel my hands. I can't remember the last time I ate. But the light is burning. That's all that matters. You were right about everything. I should have listened. I should have taken you away from here when I had the chance. I thought I was protecting you by bringing you here. I thought the ocean would give us peace. But I was wrong. This place took everything from us. It took Thomas. It took you. And now it's taking me. But I'll keep the light burning. For you. For Thomas. For every soul out there on the water who needs to find their way home. That's all I have left to give. I love you, Margaret. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I couldn't save us. But I'll keep burning. Forever. If that's what it takes. Yours always, Samuel." The letter was signed and dated November 20th, 1978. Torres stood there in the lantern room, holding the letter, and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, because November 20th was 2 days after the storm. 2 days after Samuel and Margaret had vanished. The official report said Samuel drowned on November 18th. But this letter was dated 2 days later, which meant Samuel was alive. Alive and alone in the lighthouse, writing to a wife who was already dead. Torres called the state archives. He requested copies of all the Coast Guard reports from November 1978. What he found made him go cold. On November 19th, the day after the storm, a Coast Guard patrol boat had circled Halewood Point to check for damage. In their report, they noted, "Lighthouse operational, light burning, no response to radio calls, will return tomorrow." On November 20th, another patrol came by. This time, they went ashore. They found the lighthouse empty, the lantern still burning, the logbook open to Samuel's last entry. But here's what didn't make sense. If Samuel was alive on November 20th, alive enough to write that letter and hide it in the wall, where was he when the Coast Guard arrived? And how did he disappear between the time he sealed that letter and the time they broke down the door? Torres brought in a forensic document examiner to analyze the letter. The results came back 3 weeks later. The handwriting was a perfect match for Samuel Reed. but the ink told a different story. It was a type of ballpoint ink that wasn't commonly available until the mid-1980s. At least 7 years after Samuel died, the examiner ran the test 3 times. Same result. Whoever wrote that letter used ink that didn't exist in 1978. Torres wanted to stop the restoration. He told the state the lighthouse was unsafe, but they overruled him. Historical site, tourism revenue, public interest. The restoration continued, and that's when things got worse. Workers started refusing to go into the lantern room. They said it felt wrong, too cold, like something was watching them. Tools went missing. A hammer, a wrench, a flashlight. They'd disappear from where they were set down and turn up in the lantern room, arranged in a circle around the old kerosene lamp. One worker, a young woman named Sarah Chen, was up in the lantern room alone, taking measurements, when she heard breathing behind her. She spun around. Nobody there. But when she looked at the glass, she saw something that made her drop her clipboard and run. A handprint on the inside of the glass. Fresh, still wet, like someone had just pressed their palm against it. But she was alone in a locked room, 40 feet above the ground. Torres shut down the project. He told the state he wouldn't risk his crew's safety. They could find another contractor. He packed up his tools and left. But before he did, he went back to the lantern room one last time. It was late afternoon. The sun was setting. The room was empty and quiet. Torres stood there, looking out at the ocean, and he said out loud, "I don't know if you're real, Samuel, but if you are, you can rest now. She's not coming back. You can let go." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the temperature in the room began to rise. The cold, oppressive weight that had been pressing down on him lifted, and on the desk, the old logbook flipped open. One last entry appeared, written in faint, spidery handwriting. "Thank you." Torres left and never came back. The restoration was completed by a different company. The lighthouse opened to the public in 1995, and to this day, every November 18th at 11:52 p.m., the old kerosene lantern in Halewood Point Lighthouse lights itself. Park rangers have tried to stop it. They've removed the lamp, drained the fuel, locked the room, but it doesn't matter. The light always comes back, because some promises don't end with death. Some promises burn forever. *** final reflection. Enclosure 47-0, 58-0. ***. So what really happened on that night in November 1978? The official explanation is simple. Samuel and Margaret Reed drowned in a storm. Double tragedy. End of story. But the evidence doesn't support that. Margaret's body was never found. Samuel's body was never found. And yet, for 47 years, that lighthouse has never been truly dark. Let's lay out what we know for certain. Samuel Reed was a man consumed by guilt and love in equal measure. He blamed himself for his son's death. He blamed himself for his wife's unhappiness. And when Margaret walked into that storm, he couldn't save her. So he made a promise to keep the light burning, to be the one steady thing in an unstable world, to give her a way home even if she was never coming back. Now, here's where things get strange. We have documented evidence that Samuel was alive at least 2 days after he supposedly drowned. The letter he wrote, the fuel in the lantern, the logbook entries that kept appearing years after his death. Some people think Samuel survived that night, that he stayed in the lighthouse, alone, slowly losing his mind, until he finally died of exposure or starvation, that his body is somewhere in the rocks, hidden where no one ever found it. Others believe something different. They think Samuel is still there, not as a living man, but not entirely gone either. A presence, a will, a promise made so powerful that it couldn't be broken by something as small as death. I spoke to a retired Coast Guard officer who worked the Halewood Point case in the 1980 seconds. He didn't want to be identified, but he told me something that stayed with me. He said, "I've seen men die at sea. I've seen bodies recovered weeks later. I've seen what the ocean does to people, but I've never seen anything like Halewood Point. That place doesn't follow the rules. Something is keeping that light burning, and I don't think it's the wind. There have been over 300 documented reports of strange occurrences at Halewood Point since 1978. Footsteps when no one is there, voices on the wind, the lantern lighting itself, and every single report peaks on November 18th, the anniversary of the storm, the night Samuel made his promise. In 2018, a paranormal research team got permission to spend the night in the lighthouse. They set up cameras, audio recorders, temperature sensors, electromagnetic field detectors. They documented everything. At exactly 11:52 p.m., every piece of equipment failed simultaneously. Cameras went dark. Recorders stopped. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in less than a minute. And then, through the static on their backup audio device, they captured a voice. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. Promise kept. The team left at dawn. They've never been back. Margaret Reed's sister, Elizabeth, is still alive. She's 94 years old, living in a nursing home in Portland. I reached out to her for this story. She agreed to talk, but only briefly. She told me that Margaret called her the day before the storm. She said Margaret sounded different, calm, resolved, like she'd made a decision and found peace with it. Elizabeth asked her if she was okay. Margaret said, "I think I've been dead for a long time, Liz. I just didn't know it yet." Those were the last words Elizabeth ever heard her sister speak. When I asked her what she thought happened that night, Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Samuel loved my sister more than life itself. If anyone could refuse to die, it would be him." So here's my theory. I think Samuel Reed did survive that storm. I think he pulled himself out of the water, climbed back to the lighthouse, and spent the next 2 days alone, soaked, freezing, slowly dying. I think he wrote that letter knowing he wouldn't last much longer. And I think, in those final hours, he made a choice. He could leave, let the light go out, accept that Margaret was gone and he'd failed. Or he could stay, not as a man, but as a promise, as a light in the darkness that would never, ever go out. And I think he's still there, not haunting the lighthouse, not trapped, but choosing to stay. Because for Samuel Reed, keeping the light burning is the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that gives meaning to everything he lost. Here's what I want you to think about. What promises are you carrying? What lights are you keeping burning, even when it hurts? We all have them. Promises to people we've lost. Promises to versions of ourselves we used to be. Promises that define us, even when they cost us everything. Samuel Reed kept his promise for 47 years. And counting. Was it madness? Was it love? Or was it the only thing that kept him human in a place that took everything else? I don't have the answer. But I know this. If you ever find yourself near the coast of Maine on a cold November night, and you see a light burning in the distance where no light should be, remember Samuel Reed. Remember that some promises outlast the people who make them. And ask yourself, what would you give to keep your light burning? What would you sacrifice? And would you ever be able to let it go? The lighthouse at Halewood Point is still there, still standing. The state maintains it as a historical site. You can visit during the day, walk the grounds, climb the tower, look out at the same ocean Samuel Reed watched for 16 years. But the park rangers will tell you to leave before dark. They'll tell you the road gets dangerous. They'll tell you it's policy. But if you ask them why, really why, some of them will look away, and a few will tell you the truth. They don't like to be there when the light turns on by itself. Asterisk, asterisk, engagement, and final thoughts, 58 to 0-1 hours, 3 minutes. Asterisk, asterisk. So what do you think really happened at Halewood Point? Was Samuel Reed a devoted husband who lost his mind to grief and isolation? Or is something genuinely unexplainable keeping that light burning? I want to know what you believe. Type your theory in the comments. Do you think Samuel is still there, keeping his promise? Or is there a rational explanation we're all missing? And here's a harder question. If you were Samuel, standing in that lantern room, knowing your wife was gone and you'd failed to save her, would you make the same promise? Would you choose to stay, even knowing what it would cost? Think about the people you love, the promises you've made. How far would you go to keep them? Would you give up everything? Would you refuse to let go, even after death? These are the questions that haunt me long after the story ends. Because the truth is, we're all keeping lights burning. Promises to parents, to children, to people who aren't with us anymore. And sometimes those promises are the only things that keep us going. Samuel Reed's story isn't really about a haunted lighthouse. It's about love and loss and the impossible weight of trying to make things right when everything has already gone wrong. It's about the lights we keep burning, even when no one is coming home. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something while listening, I need you to do two things. First, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you believe in Samuel Reed. Tell me what promise you're keeping. I read every single comment. Every single one. And second, subscribe. Because next week, I'm going to tell you about something even stranger. A missing girl, a locked room, and a recording that should not exist. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep your lights burning. And remember, some promises never die. They just wait in the dark, patient and eternal, for someone to remember them. Asterisk, asterisk, end screen. Soft piano, fading out. Text overlay, the light still burns at Halewood Point, every night. 11:52.